Hello and a warm welcome to Radio Prague International from me, David Vaughan. This is the first in our special series, A Stitch in Time, in which we look at the recent history of the country through the eyes of the youngest generation, a journey that also takes us far beyond the borders of the Czech Republic. Over the coming weeks we'll be hearing stories from young Czechs and other young people whose home is in this country as they talk about their family roots and what they mean to them. We invited children and teenagers aged from 11 to 18 to write a story about someone in their family who had inspired them or influenced how they see the world. We then invited them to the radio to read the stories and talk about how their ideas developed. History is hidden in the stitches in the seams of this dress, writes 17-year-old Johanna in a story about a dress that was made by her great-grandmother and has remained in her family to this day. Hence the title of this series, A Stitch in Time. The impulse for the series came from Class Acts, a Prague-based initiative that works with bilingual children in the Czech Republic, encouraging them to communicate and write in both Czech and English. One of its founders was Leah Gaffin.
A few years ago, I did a play with my children's theater group, with my drama club, that we called Journeys, and that was about kids' families, kids' ancestors, and stories of journeys that their ancestors had gone on, which somehow changed the trajectory of their lives. And my original idea with this story was the fact that their ancestors had done something long ago has somehow affected these kids' life today, even in that they're here. So that was a project I did in 2018. And the process of finding the stories was really exciting for them and for their parents and grandparents. And it ended up getting the whole families involved. And I loved that process. And I thought that with this writing contest, we could somehow do it in a little bit of a different way that might involve more children.
And that was when you approached me.
And then I met you and discovered that you also shared this love of family stories and that you had done podcasts for Czech radio. And so we came up with the idea of having kids write stories and then recording them.
I was amazed by what these children, young people came up with.
I think what to me is the most special about the stories is you really feel the connection that was made between the kids and whoever told them these stories. And that came out again and again. The kids saying they had talked to their parents or their grandparents and found out more about a person who maybe they knew a little bit about before, or maybe they didn't know very much at all. And it gave them a new appreciation of what their grandparents, great-grandparents, ancestors had done.
Czech and Czechoslovak history is full of drama and radical change, which really comes across very strongly in these stories, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. It's not a great surprise that the most dramatic stories are often the tragic ones. And I feel like, especially in the World War II years and post-war years, a lot of families here still feel that trauma and still, in certain ways, are affected by that trauma.
And one thing about today's very cosmopolitan and international Czech Republic is that not all the children have Czech roots.
No, definitely. Right. And I think in Class Acts, we've always attracted a mix of people. And I think that mix is something that I really love. I feel like this touched people in many different ways.
We'll start the series with a collage, giving us a taste of what's to come, with extracts from the stories and their authors talking about what inspired them. The collage is more or less chronological, taking us in the space of 20 minutes from the second half of the 19th century to the present day, and even to the timeless world of the ghost story.
The thing about roots, I have come to realize, is that they fulfill the same purpose for people as they do for plants. Roots keep you connected to the world and standing upright, but they do so invisibly, stretching deep into the past.
My name is Gabby Gartner, and I am from the U.S., but I have never actually lived there. I've only lived in Europe my whole life, Prague and Germany near Frankfurt. I am 15 years old. How I loved that town. It was small and fairly insignificant, but it was everything to me. I had never actually been outside of it. Now, in 1876, I was going to go far away from it. You see, I was going to take this boat all the way to the Americas, a place where they didn't speak my language, where I didn't know how things work, and where I didn't have a home. I read about my great-great-grandfather who migrated from Germany, Worms, to Nebraska. I did a little bit of research as far as where people would stay in the boat on these long journeys. The boy that he shared his food with was actually real, and I also know for a fact that he had just a wheel of cheese and a loaf of bread. Suddenly, the boat started to move. We set off for what were the longest 3 weeks of my life. I slowly ate away at the cheese and bread as the days wore on. This drew a lot of jealous stares my way. There was a boy who sat right in front of me, and that looked even hungrier than the rest. In the end, I introduced myself to him and gave him a pretty sizable amount of my food for the part of the trip that remained. He ended up being very good company for the rest of the voyage. I ran down off the boat onto the dock, frantically scanning the mass of people waiting there to see if I could find my brothers. Then my eyes were drawn to 2 tall, young men. One was waving frantically in my direction. When I looked at him, his eyes lit up. He nudged the man standing next to him, who looked up and began waving too. They both had huge smiles on their faces, and I'm sure mine was double the size of theirs.
I'm Martin Rada, and I live in the Czech Republic. I actually live close to Brno.
My name is Žaneta Malková. I'm 15 years old, and I'm from a town named Sezemice in Czech Republic.
I chose to write about the flooded village that was close to Brno, and the village was flooded because the Brno reservoir was supposed to build. It happened, I think, in 1920s.
I choose to write about my great-grandmother, Růženka. I didn't sadly have a chance to meet her, but I have heard a lot of stories from my grandmother. I think I would like her if I would meet her.
Blažena hardly breathed. Nothing was left in Staré Kníničky. All the buildings collapsed. Nobody could go around and look at their houses anymore. The reservoir is still there till now, but Staré Kníničky is just something in history books, journals and all maps, and in the stories of its former inhabitants.
A few years passed. It was the year 1918, and Růženka's father came back from the war, but he wasn't the same as he used to be. He wasn't the man they used to see every day. It was as if someone completely new replaced him. He became more aggressive, angry, and abusive. When Růženka was only 5 years old, she, as the youngest in the family, was sent to beg for food.
I think that the village wasn't important for the Moravian community, so they decided to flood it, unfortunately.
I really get anxious around strangers, and so I can't really imagine begging for food, because it will be really humiliating. So she's already super amazing in my eyes just from that.
I am Radimir Static, and I am half Canadian, half Serbian, and I've lived all my life here in Prague, Czech Republic.
I'm Amy Piper. I'm from Czech Republic, and I'm 11 years old.
My story was based on a rather harrowing chapter of my late grandfather's memoirs as a pilot in the RAF. He had been sent up, as usual, by the commanding officer of his RAF station. And unbeknownst to him, the D-Day invasion, the airborne invasion, was starting that night. And he, as a lone pilot, became caught up in the invasion force.
It's about my great-great-grandfather when World War II happened, telling people, the potential victims, that they were in danger and they packed their stuff. And then later, my great-great-grandfather got caught and got sent to a concentration camp. He was a hero.
Then the lights spread out a little, sideways and vertically, then suddenly faster, multiplying like a kaleidoscope, and drawing me ever closer to a yawning, dazzling opening. A tingling of apprehension ran down my spine. Before I could process what was happening, the sky exploded into 100 shards of light, hurtling towards me with the speed of banished angels. And at once, they were upon me, above me, below me, and on either side of me. I was in the eye of the storm. The screws on my compass rattled furiously with the drone of hundreds of propellers.
There was a town, nothing out of the ordinary. It was a very beautiful town, with a unique name, Chaslav. But something happened that changed history. You see, it was a very peaceful town. A man with the ordinary name, Ladislav Lukáš, worked at a post office. He was the head manager, and anything that went through the post office needed to be approved by him.
So my name is Eva, I'm 14, and I live in Prague, Vinohrady. So I chose to write about my great-grandmother who had to leave her home, Slovakia first, because Nazis came to power.
When I was 7 years old, it was the year 1939. That was a year.
What happened in 1939?
Well, the Nazis were long in power in Germany. And
what?
And persecuted us.
Eva immediately understands what her mom is talking about. Eva knew that her family was Jewish.
I wrote it as a play because I wanted to be in a 7-year-old girl's perspective, Eva, who is asking Olga her life story. My great-grandmother used to work here, and that's why I also chose to write this story about her, because I wanted to kind of bring her back to this building, to the radio.
My dad got us fake passports, so we left.
How and where did you leave?
Be patient. I'm going to tell you. We were heading to Norway by train, but the funny thing is, we traveled through Germany.
Weren't you scared?
We had to. There was no other way to travel to Norway.
I feel like they're really close to me, both of them. I don't know why, but I just feel the connection. Maybe because people who knew both of them always tell me I look like them. So I kind of feel really connected to them, and I feel like they're very close to me.
My name is Anushri Kshirsagar, and I'm from India. I'm 16 years old and live in Brno from last 5 years. I remembered once my grandpa telling me this story where we all sat, like all we cousins sat around him and listening very patiently, and we were mesmerized when he told us this, and I could not believe this because it's a very courageous thing that my great-great-grandfather did, and I'm very proud of him. He was a hidden hero in a freedom fighters group. Unfortunately, one day during his secret mission, my great-great-grandfather got caught by one of the local British officers and subsequently sent to jail. Although he had to face a very brutal treatment from the British in jail, he did not speak a single word or any evidence of a secret mission. After facing the court case, he was sentenced to 5 years in jail. The days of his life in jail were very tough. He was kept in a dark cell for 5 years, treated with inferior quality of food, and was not allowed to have any meetings with family or friends. His health was deteriorating day by day, and unfortunately, he died in a few months of his return after finishing the punishment, still in his 30s, in 1947. It's very easy for us to just imagine and say that, hey, if I was there, then, I would act like this and I would be the hero. But in the real life, it's very hard to do it, and to actually sacrifice and to give your life for the country and for the nation, it's not a normal and a usual thing to do. So it's very easy to imagine yourself in that position, but when you're in the situation, it's very different and difficult.
I'm Amal Alkir. I'm from Czech Republic, from Brno specifically.
My name is Jakub Liška. I live in a town called Raječko. It's close to Blansko, and Blansko is close to Brno.
The story is about my grandma when she was in the high school.
I chose František Liška because I thought he had a really interesting life from all the people in my family.
Then the day came when I went on a train to medical high school. The road was long but calm, and since it was boarding school, I had luggage with me. When I came to the school gatehouse, a nice lady showed me my room. The roommate that I had was, thank God, really nice and kind, and we did understand each other. And I remember that the first day I had lunch from my mom, and when I was eating, I almost started crying. I was missing my mom that much. Later, I adapted to the new environment and the school. I met people who changed my life by just showing or telling me small things or sentences, which I remember to this day. One of the inspiring sentences was, to never stop reading and to read everything that will get into our hands, even if we think that it would not be interesting.
I was 7 years old when my grandpa made a wooden sword for me. I only remember this because it was very significant for me. I also remember that when he gave me the sword, I was extremely happy, and I remember I said that it's the best present ever. When he gave me the sword, I really deeply hugged him, and I think it was the last hug before his death. When my great-grandpa died, my parents didn't tell me about his death for a month, and after they told me, I could feel that something was wrong. I also remember that I didn't speak to anybody for the whole day.
I didn't want it to change or speculate, but I was writing it from my point of view, as if I was the grandma, as if I was in her eyes.
The house that he lived in, I can still see it in our neighborhood, so he's still in my heart, and I always, when I pass through his house, he's I can still feel that he's there. And my grandma, she lives right next to his house where he lived. So when I always go to my grandma's house, then I think of him always.
I'm Johanna Tritner. I'm 17 years old and I'm from Prague in the Czech Republic.
I'm Michael Lovett. I'm 13 years old and I'm from Prague, Czech Republic.
I wrote about the story of my great-grandmother, the mother of my father's mother, who grew up in the Orlické Mountains, and she was a seamstress there. She sewed beautiful clothes, many of which we still have today. But then when collectivization came in the 50s, she had to give up her company and she had to start working on a cow farm instead.
My story is about my grandfather and how in the 1950s, when he was around 10 years old, his grandparents' farm and land were forced to be taken away from them by the collectivization organization in Czechoslovakia.
She touched the soft material for the future dress, buried her fingers in it, imagined her daughter walking down the street in the beautiful blue velvet, and for a moment she got lost in the back of her mind, in a maze of spools and buttons and years long past. Only the toll of the faraway church bell urged her to get up, blow out the candle, carefully fold the fabric into the darkness of a closet to be continued the next day, and get to bed. 2021. I look at my grandmother, fussing over a blue velvet dress as I pull it over my sweater and jeans in her stuffy apartment. She had dug up the garments from the depths of her closet, saying her mother must have made it to her 60 or 70 years ago, when my grandmother was in her early 20s. A mother's gift to her married daughter. The dress fits surprisingly well, considering my grandmother is about a head shorter than I am. She tells me it looks beautiful, better than it ever did on her. I don't believe her.
They could both see how sad he was. His eyes were full of tears. Once he was inside the barn, he sat on a small haystack. Yuji's grandmother asked him what happened at the municipal office, and he told her that they forced him to hand over his land and threatened him with a gun to his head. He said that he had no other option. Then he laughed that at least there would be less work for him to do. Yuji could see all his grandfather's pain in that laugh. Deep down, Yuji knew that his grandfather wanted the best for his family, and in this case, he did the best thing for his family, but one of the worst for himself. His grandmother, now also in tears, went over to his grandfather and gave him a big, warm hug. Giving the farm away scarred Yuji's grandfather for the rest of his life.
My name is Anli, and I was adopted at a very young age, so I don't have a record of my biological parents. I thought of the story as an opportunity to connect to that side of my family's past. And the economic reformation of the 1980s in China particularly stood out to me. So my piece is really just a speculation of their experiences.
When a situation was not ideal, my father and mother had the persistent idea that we were resilient like the sugarcane crop we grew. I don't know if it really holds true or if it's something parents tell to console. I eyed the setting sun over the vast green of our fields, the sun slowly filtering out of the horizon. If I really think about it, the sun and the cycle of harvest and planting set the pace of life. A sweet humidity filled the air, and there was no longer the beating sun of the day. Before I enjoyed it too much, I crossed the courtyard and into our dwelling. I was invited by the aromas of supper that began to permeate the air and the promise of a full stomach.
I feel quite disconnected from, my biological family. So I guess maybe I could kind of relate by having to dive into their experiences.
Father began to talk. He laid out our future in an even tone. We would not farm anymore. We would move out to a growing city. We could not stay. We would have nowhere here anymore. There was no talk of the sugarcane resilience. Somehow, I did not know what to feel. Father explained that we were helping our country become modern. I was open to accepting this. We did not and could not fight it or stick it out.
I'm Lucy, or Lucy and Arendt. I'm 13 years old and I live in Prague 7, near Letna Park and Stromovka.
My name is Natalie Rowe, and I have a British father and a Czech mother. Can't say where I'm from because we've moved around so much that I can't define that yet, but I have found many comfortable places where we've lived.
I decided to write about my grandparents and my father around the time when they managed to escape the USSR and managed to end their early life in America.
More than anything, my grandparents wanted my dad to try to fit in. My grandma was determined that my dad would not seem like a misfit around American kids. Using what they knew about American style, which came from underground disco records they had managed to hear at family and friends' houses, and smuggled foreign magazines in Russia. They bought Dad a blazing pair of striped disco bell-bottom pants for his first school day, and a pair of tall platform shoes to round out his look. When Dad started school the next week, he may not have fit in as much as his parents had hoped, since the other kids were much more calmly dressed in faded jeans and worn sneakers. But, judging from the surprised and intrigued looks they shot his way, they took him for a miniature rock star. At least, this is what my dad has always believed. He can't be sure since for the first year he struggled to understand a word that anyone in school said to him.
Well, my dad, he was in the British military, and he's always telling me stories that he encountered while he was there. So this one in particular he told me once, I found really interesting, and it was my first idea when I was given the task to write about my ancestors. This was the first idea that came to me. It was Team Alpha. They were covered in mud, and pieces of grass and moss were plastered to their body like wallpaper. "Where were you?" the captain asked furiously. The other group of filthy soldiers looked at him with blank stares. "We don't know. We saw something." "What did you see?" "It was a man, a strange man. He was standing on a hill, and he didn't move. We tried to look at him through our scopes, but—" "You couldn't see him?" the captain interrupted. "Well, yes. You guys saw it too?" I don't think I want to define it as a ghost story, but I certainly want to define it as maybe a mystery, because I know that it can seem that it's probably a ghost story if they couldn't see it through their scopes, but it's definitely a mystery, and I guess it can be interpreted in any way. I think it's very important to embrace mysteries, and that as humans we always want to figure out and come up with an explanation for something, but actually there's quite a beauty in the unknown.
I feel like a lot of what I live today comes from everything that my ancestors in the past went through, so that kind of leads to the space and time where I am today.
Some people may believe that humanity is literally revolving backwards because humanity hasn't learned its lesson. It can happen any time. Any war can happen, and it can be in the hands of someone who's powerful and may take advantage of the situation. You never know.
There are holes that mice must have nibbled away over the years on the hem and under the right sleeve. I'll never be able to wear it, yet it is more beautiful than any dress I've ever worn. History is hidden in the stitches in the seams of this dress. The folds hide the fates of 2 young women, one of whom I'll never know. I have only the marks her needles left behind.
In order of appearance, we had Lucien Arendt, Gabi Gardner, Martin Rada, Žaneta Malková, Rademír Tatic, Amy Piper, Eva Nováková, Anushri Kshirsigar, Amal Alker, Jakub Liška, Johanna Treitnar, Michael Lovett, Anne-Lee Frisk, and Natalie Rowe. We also had Julie De Martini, Leah Gaffin, and Ondřej Novak. The music was composed, arranged and performed by Bára Dočkalová. We'll be hearing from them all again in the coming weeks, but for the time being, from me, David Vaughan, and all of us here at Radio Prague International, goodbye.